So welcome, friends, to the February Continuing Quaker Education session. This is part of this year's series on Friends Peace Testimony. And today we're going to be talking about teaching peace. We are very fortunate to have two teachers from Friends Community School, Keely Kozak and Terrence Smith, with us today. And why don't we begin with each of you telling us a little about yourself, and kind of ending up with what brought you to teaching as a profession, as a vocation. So Keely, why don't you begin?
Hello, everyone. I am in my 12th year of teaching. 7 of those have been with Friends Community School as a first and second grade teacher. But it is a second career for me. So I have a bachelor's in political science and a master's in nonprofit management. And I kind of made my way to DC actually first as an unpaid intern for the Washington Peace Center, supporting them in some activism work and doing their early web development. And then made my way through 7 or 8 years of fundraising and marketing for DC nonprofits. And when I was doing fundraising and marketing, found myself out of school. And one of the side projects was that I got to be a weekly reading tutor with a student who was struggling in reading. And over time, as I met with this student every week, I realized that that was my favorite part of my job. And it wasn't part of my job. So that's when I decided to make a change. And I was lucky to do a transition program where I was able to become a certified teacher. I spent some time in DC charter schools teaching kindergarten, and then made the transition to Friends Community School teaching first and second grade mixed age classroom. So my work is primarily with 5 through 8-year-olds.
Thank you, Keely. And Terrence.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Terrence Smith. This is my first year at Friends Community, but it is my 13th year of teaching, so one more up by Keely, but an awesome company. I am a transplant from Boston, Massachusetts, relocated to the DMV area 5 years ago, where I began teaching 4th grade in Alexandria City Public Schools, spent 3 years within that district, and then taught at a charter school in DC this past school year. But my teaching career has started in my home city and state, where I have a bachelor's in history from Emmanuel College, a master's of art in teaching, elementary ed from Northeastern. And so what got me into teaching is, I think, just the influences of teachers that I've had along my years in school, that were very inspirational. They were kind of like my second set of parents. They were the ones that I would go to kind of just figure out certain life situations. And so wanting to give back, I think teaching is one of those professions where you see the fruits of your labors early on, as opposed to other careers where you don't see much fruit until you're on your way to retirement. But I also feel as though in all the communities that I have served in as a teacher, that I have given back in a way that has been transformative, to helping to prepare students to be able to go out and to be valuable members and citizens in society. And so I love that we have that same motto at Friends Community, and being a part of that definitely resonates with me from a sense of community. And so definitely loving that Friends Community gets to be a stop on my career path. As you know, I hope to have many more years working with this awesome community.
Thank you, Terrence. So part of the mission statement of Friends Community School is to help develop joyous peacemakers. That's kind of baked into the foundation of this institution. So Terrence, kind of what brought you to teaching peace as a thing, as opposed to, say, social studies? And, what does it mean to you to be teaching peace?
Peace is one of those things I think is, as we talk about the spices in Quaker education, definitely one of those things that you need to have in order to be a valuable member in society. I think peace, as we see in our world of ever-changing events, it's something to kind of keep the harmony and balance of life. So teaching it to students very early on, I love that teaching allows for you to work with people that are still open to learning and change. And so teaching peace allows for that to be an ever-flowing thing where you're teaching students how to, interact with each other in a way that allows for everyone to be welcomed and accepted. And so for me, teaching it outside of my core curriculum is definitely something that I love doing with our meeting partners, which we just had a bout of doing with the MLK March that we just recently had this past week. And so getting students to see that coming about peace is something that we all can own no matter how old we are. And it definitely resonates within us to have this sense of purpose and meaning in society where we're all unified. And so doing it or teaching it even as young as second grade was actually very impressionable and indelible to see that they were able to grasp the concept at such an early age. And I know our kindergartners were able to as well. But to see them, get behind a cause, to understand what it meant to stand behind something was very meaningful. So for me, that to be able to see that and to have kids take it personally and to own it was definitely encouraging. So.
And Keely, kind of same question. What does teaching peace mean to you, and how did you come to it?
Yeah. Well, when you're teaching early childhood, there's a lot of lots of conflicts. And so we come to, I think, teaching peace through conflict resolution. So a big focus of my fall was peaceful conflict resolution and coming at it through an idea of empathy. So first talking about feelings and how it's natural to have strong feelings and even natural to sometimes want to solve them with violence. And how as we grow and we learn, we realize through our own experiences and things we've seen that that doesn't solve problems, that escalates problems. So we did a lot of reflection on that explicitly. And we talked about how when we're very angry, very frustrated, very sad, we can't effectively resolve a conflict in that moment, and how we step back and we practiced breathing and settling exercises. We practice explicit ways to talk to other people, really talking about the behaviors we need to change, the specific actions that were hurtful and not the person. Which is a big thing in the kindergarten, first and second grade, where there's a tendency to, when there's a conflict, when something negative happens, they want to put that person as a negative person and kind of label and categorize things in that way, because that's how their brain development is working. They're just starting to do that. And it's an important piece of teaching pieces to get them to do that reflection and empathy and separate sometimes those actions that we do from the person and their identity, to be able to step back and peacefully resolve. So conflict resolution is one piece. We also explicitly, through our talk about the spices, try to define what is peace to us, because the kindergarten, first and second grades are still just developing that concept and language. So we talked about what ideas we already had. And then we read a few books. Todd Parr has a peace book. And then there's one called What Does Peace Feel Like and Look Like and Smell Like? And we kind of talked about those concepts and what it meant for us personally. And through conversations, help students develop an idea of what that word means to them. And we came out, their very first impression is, of course, nonviolence, like no wars, no fighting, no weapons. And then they came to more of an at peace thing, where peace means feeling safe, feeling like you belong, having your basic needs met. And then as we talked about it as a community, we were able to extend that to what every person in our community needs to feel peace. And that's where we can like extend it into the social justice aspects, making sure everyone has belonging, making sure everyone has their basic needs met. And then we can study peaceful protests, activism, and kind of take it to that next level. So that's how we approach it in the younger grades.
Thank you, Keely. Terrence, you said something that I'd like to follow up on. You and I can't paraphrase. I mean, I can't quote you exactly, so I'll try and paraphrase. But you kind of said when you started talking about the march the other day, that was kind of separate from the curriculum, and it was an opportunity. I'm wondering, is peace as a thread something that you feel like you integrate into the curriculum, or is it kind of, it pops up every once in a while? You know, how do the kind of the I don't know, pedagogical content and peace work together?
Yeah, sure. In social studies this year, and also having the great opportunity to be our social studies curriculum coordinator for grades K through 8. But speaking specifically to my courses, in 5th grade, we have a global geography and world cultures class. And so that's one where students get to kind of look at conflicts throughout the world and look at how various countries learn how to deal with it. But before I get them on that journey or that path, we do a project that I created called My Culture, My Voice, where it allows for students to research their cultural heritage. And then we do a gallery walk where we kind of look at the differences that we all have, because what I teach students is that where we come from kind of helps us to, or it plays a part in how we view the world and how we interact with the world. And so when we do that project, kids get to see the differences amongst themselves, but the differences that also help to make us unique, and even the similarities. And so, for instance, we just looked at the population crisis in Asia. And so they had to do a project where they wrote a letter to the UN to kind of provide some solutions there, where, you know, we know in our world globally, countries don't like to be bossed around. And so you have to come at some of these solutions peacefully. You have to kind of balance the differences that you may have and the power structures to kind of, you know, get at this thing called peace. But even in our ancient civilization course with 6th grade students, we've started to look at the progression of early civilizations and kingdoms. And so we get into the Roman Empire. That's going to be one of the biggest places where they will see early conflict amongst early civilizations, and kind of, you know, looking at leadership styles and deciding whether or not, you know, what made a Roman emperor a villain versus a victor, and how does that influence how you know, an empire, you know, rises to power or declines. And so with peace, you know, I teach students that we all play an important part in history, and they always learn early that we study history to not repeat the mistakes of the past. And so we kind of go through some of that conflict resolution of looking at ways that led to those problems and, you know, potential solutions that could have been abated early on. So those are some other ways that peace is embedded, and also in our advisory program, at least in the middle school, is helping students to kind of talk out those differences, similar to what Keely was talking about with the younger kids, because we see that conflicts don't stop. they get bigger, and kids, as they grow up, they develop the language and the vocabulary to be able to articulate that. So definitely continuing on with some of that conflict resolution as well in our advisory program. But in the curriculum, that would be one of the ways that we're touching upon peace.
Thank you, Terrence. Keely, you actually already started answering this, but kind of the broad question is, what is the hardest for your students to grasp hold of? And you were talking about kind of developmental stages, which obviously is absolutely central. I wonder if there's more, there's certain things that are just kind of tough and certain things that flow.
Yeah, so the kids in my age, they want to sort into categories, often binary categories. We start in second grade, like getting into more of the Venn diagram thinking, where things can be both instead of one or the other. And so when it's definitely in conflict resolution, when there's a right or a wrong, there's not like ways where we could both be right. And so helping them see the nuances in thinking and start to develop that. And like I said, the empathy, we're building empathy at this age. And so we're trying to talk through lots of scenarios. How would you feel in this situation if tables were turned? How did you feel when something similar happened to you? And at our age, lots and lots of read alouds to build empathy so they can see characters dealing with different situations, maybe before they've had to have that experience. So I think for us, it's a lot of just the developmentalness of trying to introduce concepts, like when things like current events trickle in, like they can't really understand the Russian-Ukraine conflict. It's like if Russia started a war, everyone in Russia is bad. And so it's trying to like reach things where they are and help them see different perspectives, because they don't have the framework for how global politics work. They haven't gone to Terrence yet to get the framework for how global politics work. So I think that's one of the biggest things, is just their developmental stage.
Thank you. Terrence, if you could explain to us how things work, I think all of us would be incredibly grateful. But kind of specifically, so you teach, middle school. Obviously, that's a different developmental stage, but your students are still kind of far from full adult development. What is kind of the hardest for your students to grasp hold of?
I think, like Keely, empathy is still one of those hard things to kind of grasp, particularly when we do look at world conflicts as well. One of the things in particular, I know every morning in my advisory, we watch, CNN actually has a 10-minute news segment for students. And so we watch it, and it's one of the things in my career that I've shown students, and they're always hooked to it. And sometimes I'm like, I'm not sure if they're ready to, hear some of the topics, but CNN does a really great job in making sure that it's kid friendly and focused. But I use it as a way to kind of build their empathy in terms of looking at various things across the globe and even here in the United States. I think the biggest part I've heard kids talk about is the mask mandate that we've experienced during COVID. But they recently got to see that China had no choice in the matter, and how that caused some, conflicts and uproar there. So getting them to kind of reflect and think about, we had similar issues here in the US with that, but we come from a democratic society where they come from a communist society. And so getting them to understand that, we may complain about things, but there are other people who are in worse off situations where they don't have a voice. So teaching them to know that their voice does have power and weight but making sure that they understand how to go about it. I think so. That's the other thing that you teach students to kind of do. And I think the other challenge to that empathy piece is a lot of our students are gamers, and so being in this virtual reality, some students have a hard time coming back out of that, because let's face it, the pandemic, they were all at home, and so they had to recreate this reality. And so getting a lot of students out of that, and so a lot of it, like Keely, is processing with them, getting them to see other perspectives, which is sometimes hard, because you still have this I stage, and you're like, no, you're amongst other people. So I try to make as much real world connections as I can with them, and have these frank discussions with them. And even when conflicts come up in the classroom where students may complain about the workload, or just not hearing their voices heard, I have to always let them know, as the teacher, I have to make decisions that are in your best interest. And yeah, I'll hear what you have to say, but we have to come to this happy medium. So I think always allowing for them to hear others, and allowing for them to have that time to process and kind of put themselves in other people's shoes. But yeah, empathy is a hard thing. I think, as we've seen in the last few years, as we've all had to be self-protectors, in a very critical and crucial time in our country. So coming out of that and getting back to this oneness and this sense of community, is a challenge. But I think, as Keely and I have both described, we're set for this, and we're prepared because it's meaningful, in our community, at Friends, and abroad.
So you said something, you talked about the gamer culture.
Mm.
And, it strikes me that in addition to kind of developmental stages of childhood, there's also kind of a cultural tide that FCS is working against to a great degree. That it's not just gaming; it's TV shows, it's the news. The children you teach are surrounded by images of violence, and in many ways, if we're talking professional sports, the glorification of violence. And I'm wondering, how does the cultural piece, how do you address that cultural piece, which of course is being reinforced every day just as you're teaching?
I would say for the most part, that's not something our kids, well, at least the group of students that I have, it's not much of a thing that comes up. I think our students are more soccer watchers than anything, where there can be some violence, but I think they do look at it as a sense of like it's not right. So there's no condoning of it. But I do think it makes them question as to why adults would engage in that level of behavior. So I think that's a question where I love our students for the fact that they look at the world and they do question as to why would adults act that way. Whereas to opposed to in other teaching communities that I've been in, they could identify with that and condone it. So it's not one where we have to always tell students it's wrong. I think they are automatically get it, but it's also explaining how adults can get into that level of violence. But I think one of the things is just, I think having those open conversations and dialogue, not just at school, but also at home. And I get a sense at at FCS is that it's one where our parents are definitely careful about what students are watching, but for the most part, they're not. I think the most that I've heard students watch maybe some Netflix series, but nothing too graphic that we have to kind of address, and it impacts our school community.
Got it. And Keely, how does kind of that cultural piece play out in the younger grades?
I think there too, there's like a sheltering we do with the kids that are 8 and under for the most part. You can tell that kids with older siblings have like a higher level of exposure to news and current events. And sometimes it trickles in and we address it as it trickles in. Generally, we don't ever bring up any of the horribly violent things in our communities with the kids. We're kind of, our policy is, of course, if they bring it up, we need to help them process it, and reach out to parents to let them know that they can follow up at home too. But we all kind of work together to shelter them a little bit until they can process things. But they do, I mean, they do know what's going on. And I think Terrence is getting at it to a degree. We don't live in a peaceful world. They see that we don't live in a peaceful world, but there's a bit of that that drives them to care about peace. Because they see the absence and they can identify that, it makes them want to work towards peace, and they can stand behind issues. Like they can be anti-gun, even at second grade. They can care about how people are treated by the police, and they can take those issues to heart and start their activism that young, because they see those issues. I don't know that we've ever had peaceful times on this planet, and there's always different issues to be working towards to make this world a more peaceful, just place for everyone. But I think the kids seeing all that absence of peace and justice gives them an opportunity to step up, and we help them understand that they can, and give them opportunities to start.
The two queries we have for you are, what was your personal experience learning peace? And for you, what were, or maybe still are, the hardest concepts or skills surrounding peace? Light of my